Hello, I'm Emily Angwin. This is the News Hour live from Doha. Coming up in the next 60 minutes, devastation and destruction on the streets of Gaza. Israeli airstrikes have killed at least 900 Palestinians, a third of them children. Dozens of rockets fired towards the southern Israeli city of Ashkelon after residents were urged to evacuate. Israeli forces recover the bodies of hundreds killed in Hamas's operation on Saturday. The US president condemns the attack.
This was an act of sheer evil. More than 1,000 civilians slaughtered.
And tensions mount in the border region of Israel and Lebanon following the exchange of fire over the past 3 days. Welcome to the program. It's 21 GMT. That's midnight in Gaza and Israel, where the war is now into its fourth day. The Israeli military is bombarding Gaza. Hamas is launching more rockets, and the death toll on both sides is rising. Air and artillery strikes on Gaza have pounded the strip from north to south, targeting the port in the last few hours. At least 900 Palestinians have been killed. More than 900 Israelis are dead since Hamas launched a surprise military operation on Saturday. Hamas has vowed to respond to all Israeli strikes on Gaza with equal force. It fired a barrage of rockets towards southern Israel. It targeted the port city of Ashkelon after earlier warning people to leave. Israel has also imposed a total siege on Gaza, cutting off all supplies of food, water and fuel. The European Union has opposed the move. US President Joe Biden has confirmed 14 Americans were killed in Hamas's military attack. It also reiterated Washington's support for Israel.
We must be crystal clear. We stand with Israel. We stand with Israel. And we will make sure Israel has what it needs to take care of its citizens, defend itself, and respond to this attack. There's no justification for terrorism. There's no excuse. Hamas does not stand for the Palestinian people's right to dignity and self-determination. Its stated purpose is the annihilation of the state of Israel and the murder of Jewish people. They use Palestinian civilians as human shields. Hamas offers nothing but terror and bloodshed with no regard to who pays the price.
In Gaza, there are growing concerns about the humanitarian situation, as Ressel Sutter reports.
Building after building, block after block. All are now leveled. Many people inside, including children and the elderly, did not have time to escape. By midday on Tuesday, Israel had bombed nearly 2,000 locations in the densely populated Gaza Strip and promised to intensify its assault, leaving the 2.3 million Palestinians living there with nowhere to go.
The
Israeli army made a phone call to a person who wasn't here. He was in Al Rimal. We came running and they told one of our neighbors that the building has to be evacuated. Where should they go? They said they can go to the sea. People started running and suddenly we heard an explosion. My brother's 2 children were standing in the doorway. They were killed.
On Monday, the Israeli defense minister announced a complete siege of the Gaza Strip, cutting off supplies of electricity, fuel, food and water. The unrelenting bombardment of homes, communication towers, hospitals, roads and mosques has become a daily occurrence.
Our area, Al Ramal, is a quiet area, but when I came here I didn't recognize it. It's completely destroyed. All its features have changed. This is unfair. This is terrorism. There is no humanity. Families here live in peace and do not have any links to anything. What happened was revenge, a crime.
People are searching for survivors under the rubble. Nowhere is safe, and there is nowhere to go, they say.
We are told to evacuate the eastern part of Khan Yunis and go to a safe place, but there is no safe place in the Gaza Strip.
This hospital in Rafah is understaffed and under-equipped, and the number of people arriving here needing treatment keeps growing. Some of these children's parents have died. Many don't know yet how much they have lost.
Now there's a real massacre being committed against innocent civilians in the Sabra area. There are dozens of victims, and ambulances and civilian vehicles are still evacuating the victims from this house that was directly targeted.
Journalists reporting on the front lines of this war have also become targets. They, like many of Gaza's faces, are now gone forever. The Israeli airstrikes have already killed hundreds of people and injured thousands. But people in Gaza fear the worst is still to come. Resul Serdar, Al Jazeera.
We have a team of correspondents covering all angles of this story. We're in Ashdod, southern Israel. We'll also have the latest from West Jerusalem. But first, let's go to Tariq Abu Azum in Gaza. Tariq, we've seen multiple strikes over the past few hours across Gaza. Boats have also been struck. What's the latest on the ground?
Well, the Israeli attacks on the Gaza Strip continues till this current moment, and the Israeli occupation forces are targeting the Gaza Strip, specifically the north areas of the Gaza Strip, with heavy bombs and artilleries. To this very moment, these areas were heavily bombarded, where residential buildings were leveled to the ground on the heads of its dwellers. Now, the situation in the Gaza Strip goes from terrible to catastrophic. Till this very moment, medical teams are still unable to access Al-Karama neighborhood, which was heavily targeted during the last hour. Also, civil defense team are trying to reach the place and even to evacuate victims. Now, it has been reported that a number of people are still stuck under the rubble of the destroyed houses inside the Gaza Strip. Till this current moment, no barrages of rockets had been launched from the Gaza Strip towards the Israeli settlements, except that during the last hour, the Israeli bombardment in Al-Karama neighborhood was intensified, and the situation right now in Gaza is relatively calm.
We know hospitals are overwhelmed, Tariq, and there are 180,000 people displaced. What's the humanitarian situation we're heading towards?
Now, Palestinian hospitals are full of victims and even injured people who are receiving treatment after being injured due to the Israeli ongoing strikes on the Gaza Strip. In terms of the humanitarian condition of the Gaza Strip, the majority and a great number of people in the Gaza Strip were displaced from their original houses due to the ongoing strikes. Specifically in the eastern areas, they displaced from the homes into the central areas of the Gaza Strip, where they think that it's going to be much more safe for them. Now, the United Nations affiliated schools open its gates to the displaced people to be hosted in, providing them with humanitarian aid and essential items to survive as well. Now, people inside the targeted areas still calling for rescue teams to evacuate them. So with the continuation of shuttering borders and even the entry of essential items and needs for the Gazans, the situation is expected to be worsened.
Okay, thanks so much for the update. Tariq Abu Azum in Gaza. Let's head to Ashdod in southern Israel now, where Mohammed Jamjoom is standing by for us. Mohammed, explain where you are and just how fluid is the situation at the moment.
Emily, let me walk you through what's happened here in Ashdod the past few hours. We've been reporting the last few hours about a massive security incident that was going on here. It brought out, dozens of army soldiers, policemen, reservists to this intersection where we are in the southern city of Ashdod, close to the coast, actually on the coast. And at one point, there was concern that perhaps Hamas fighters might have infiltrated this area by sea. Now, what we have heard so far is not from the Israeli government. There's no official statement as to what precisely transpired. But more and more Israeli media outlets are reporting that what happened was an incident of friendly fire, that when there was this panic that perhaps there was an infiltration by Hamas fighters, that at some point different units, different officers in the army and patrolmen perhaps fired upon each other. Now, there is some video that our cameraman was able to film showing some of what happened in the area where we are. In this video, you do see patrolmen and soldiers crouching with their guns. You also see army soldiers launching a drone in the area, the chaos that was going on, people running around. But also, you do see ambulances collecting what appears to be at least 3 injured people. In the reports we're seeing in the Israeli media right now, it is stating that there were at least 2 service members that were injured as a result of what's being called friendly fire. We are awaiting more confirmation, more information. We will get those details to you as we have it. We have asked many of the service members, many of the security apparatus that have been around here in the last few hours what exactly was going on. They would not give any details. They would only make us move into a hotel at certain points, not let us move around, go outside. Finally, we can come outside. Most of the security people that were here have left, but it all really just goes to show how much panic there is, how much concern, how volatile the situation is, how fluid it is, despite the fact that it would seem highly unlikely that Hamas fighters would be able to get to this area. You're talking about a city that is about 30 kilometers north of the border with Gaza. There was this panic, there was this concern amongst some of the officers that we had been speaking with earlier in the evening that perhaps that was the case. And that just really goes to show that for many of the people here in southern cities like this, what once seemed completely unthinkable after the incidents of the past 3 days now seems within the realm of the possible. And that really goes to show how concerned everybody is, how worried they are about what's going to be happening in the days to come. Emily?
Mohammed, Reuters news agency is reporting that the Israeli military says the first plane carrying American ammunition has landed in Israel. And all this comes as fighting is continuing, we believe, in some areas.
Well, we do know, Emily, that fighting is continuing. Now, there's a lot of contradictory reports about what precisely is going on specifically in those towns and villages on Israel's border with Gaza. You have had statements from the Israeli army over the course of the last 24 hours saying that the army has retaken full control of that area. But what's not known is how many of those towns and villages have been evacuated. We were told at one point that there were dozens of towns and villages that have been evacuated, but we also know that there are some towns and villages where residents were told to continue to stay, shelter in place, be someplace where they consider to be safe until the army is able to move in there. Just earlier today, we were told of at least 3 different areas in the south in which there had been gunfights, shootouts between the Israeli army and Hamas fighters. The concern is that either there are Hamas fighters that had infiltrated to begin with and had stayed in those areas and had hidden, or that perhaps there might even be Hamas fighters that are continuing to infiltrate through the fence from Gaza where there are those holes. So a lot of confusion, a lot of different reporting. But even though Israel's army is saying they are in full control of that area, the fact of the matter is that fighting is still going on. And there is still a lot of concern about fighters, about Hamas fighters being in those areas, about potentially continuing infiltration. And so that's why there are these conflicting reports that are coming out. And that's why you saw a situation happen like what we saw here in Ashdod, because there is so much worry about these things happening and being able to, potentially being able to happen even more. Emily?
Okay, make sure you keep us updated throughout the night. Mohammed Jamjoom in southern Israel for us. Let's head to West Jerusalem now, where Hoda Abdelhamid is standing by for us. Hoda, just how tense is it on the ground at the moment?
Well, certainly there's a lot of anxiety and apprehension, I would say, across the board, whether you are a Jewish Israeli or a Palestinian, especially in places like Jerusalem, where the 2 communities live in proximity. You know, throughout the day, you walk around the city, there's absolutely no one. The businesses are shut down. And I would say also that there is rage, and that rage is mounting simply because the full picture of what happened during those hours when the Hamas fighters crossed and reached all these communities living along the border is still emerging. And each time the Israeli military reaches a new community or a new town or a new village and finds more dead bodies and more very difficult stories and very sad stories, well, the public opinion here becomes more and more enraged. And so you do have the Palestinians who are also extremely worried, and they fear that they will be acts of revenge on them, even though they had nothing to do with all of this. The Palestinians living here in occupied East Jerusalem, who already would tell you that they feel constantly under pressure. They feel that they're constantly monitored. They feel that they're constantly put on the spot. Now a lot of them would tell you that they went to the market, they got supplies, they're making sure their kids don't get on the street, they're making sure everybody stays at home, because they are also extremely worried about what could unfold over the next few days and weeks. And if you look back at 2021, when there was another operation over Gaza, there was a lot of upheaval in all the mixed cities around Israel, and a lot of anger at the Palestinians. So certainly there is that tension, and there is that increasing rage among the Israelis because they're beginning to know or getting the full scope of what happened, and the number of dead keeps on increasing by the day.
Hoda, what about politically? Has this united what was a very divided Israeli Knesset?
Well, Israelis usually, when they are facing an outside threat, as they say it, or in times of war, they usually know how to unite. There is a show of solidarity across the board, and they put their political divisions aside. We've seen that at the people level. A lot of the protesters who were just until last week holding weekly protests against the Netanyahu government and his coalition, well, now they are helping. They are being volunteers. At the political level, there was supposed to be a meeting tonight between Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the leader of the National Unity Party, Benny Gantz. There was a lot of speculation that meeting would actually, the outcome of that meeting rather, would be the formation of this emergency unity government, which is basically a war cabinet. Now we have heard that meeting has been postponed until tomorrow morning, 8:30 GMT, but that's not an indication that it's not happening. From what we understand, it's simply because the Prime Minister was in Tel Aviv having a meeting with his security establishment, with the military, and that meeting has gone on for hours. We're not really sure if it's over yet. We haven't heard about that yet. So there was no time tonight to meet, for the two politicians to meet. But there are efforts in that way, and that is something that Prime Minister Netanyahu would want sooner rather than later, because he is a very divisive figure at the moment. He used to be Mr. Security, not anymore after this, and he needs to show that he can lead the country and all of the country in this time.
Okay, appreciate the update as always. Hoda Abdelhamid in West Jerusalem, thank you. Meanwhile, the Israeli army says its soldiers are in full control of all communities along the border with Gaza. Bodies are being recovered in several settlements close to the border after Hamas attacked on Saturday. Sarah Khairat visited a military facility in Israel that's being used as a makeshift morgue.
This building just behind me here is where the military personnel would normally come. But because they're so overwhelmed with the number of Israeli deaths, now this is the only centre in the whole of the country for Israelis that have died in these attacks to be identified. Their bodies are brought here.
It started with bodies being picked up in private cars on Saturday. And then we began the process of identification. Soldiers wear name tags, but most bodies here are of Israeli civilians who were in bed sleeping when they were slaughtered, with not much to identify them with. We retrieved bodies while under fire. There are families here who still don't know what happened to their loved ones, killed or taken to Gaza, or laying out there in the desert. They simply don't know.
This operation behind me, we're told, is 24 hours. We've seen volunteers coming along giving food and drinks to some of the security forces, the police, the ambulances. We've also seen a lot of activity from those obviously dealing with the bodies inside, wearing like gas masks and covering their shoes and their clothes with plastic gloves and things you would usually wear, as you would assume, when there are bodies piled up that have probably been lying in the heat because it's been quite warm here for the last couple of days. Now, we've also been seeing families lining up along the road all of the way this way here. They've also been coming through, and you can clearly see how upset, worried, concerned, angry they are at this whole situation, but also frustrated because they haven't been able to receive answers. Some of them say their family members are missing, so they're not sure if some of those are the ones that were taken as captives across that border into Gaza, or if their bodies of those family members are here in the building behind us. There's a lot of confusion still. There's a lot of unanswered questions.
There have also been explosions on Israel's northern border with Lebanon. The Israeli military launched artillery strikes in response to rocket attacks by Hezbollah. Ali Hashim is in Nakura, southern Lebanon, for us.
There is a significant development with Hamas's Al-Qassam brigades issuing a statement claiming responsibility for the missiles or the rockets that were launched in South Lebanon today. This is very significant because if we put this beside yesterday's Islamic Jihad's infiltration to the borders towards Israel and engaging in a battle with the Israeli army, we're seeing now a new dynamic here on the Lebanese front. As I said before, this is an operation area, and this operation area is now engaging Palestinian factions on Lebanese soil, and this is the first time since 1982 that Palestinian factions are engaging direct with the Israelis on the Lebanese borders. This is the development that seems to be different than all what's been happening the past days. Yes, Hezbollah has attacked in the past few days Israeli posts in Sheba farms. It retaliated yesterday for Israel's airstrike on its positions today, and just a few hours ago Hezbollah issued a statement claiming responsibility for an attack on an Israeli military vehicle in Avivim with guided missiles. So it's getting more and more complicated. Situation is escalating day after day. However, it's still contained. We can't say that it's out of control, but the more there is blood, the more things are going to go out of control.
The EU's top diplomat, Josep Borrell, is urging both sides to respect international humanitarian law.
It means that when in the ground has the right to defense, certainly it has, but it has to be implemented according with the principles of international humanitarian law. And we call for the release of hostages, and we call for the access of food, water, and medicines, which is also according with international humanitarian law. And we call for a neat political solution that could avoid, once and again, this cycle of violence.
Borrell also said it would be a mistake for the bloc to stop sending aid to Palestinians. The EU initially said it would suspend payments, but appears to have reversed its decision following protests from several member states. James Moran is a former EU ambassador to Egypt, Jordan and Yemen. He says there are long-standing protections on how aid is spent.
I think that there have been very strong safeguards in place for many years now about how EU aid is administered and spent in Palestine, whether it be in the West Bank or whether it be in Gaza when it comes to development aid and so on. There are firewalls and any number of restrictions on the disbursement of that aid, and those are in place. Whether or not new restrictions are required, well, we'll see. But for the time being, I think it's pretty clear that the EU aid that is provided goes primarily through the Palestinian Authority for the benefit of Palestinian people in Palestine.
Let's go to Washington, D.C. now, where I'm joined by Heidi Jo Castro. Hello there, Heidi. There have been some strong words from US President Joe Biden tonight. He condemned Saturday's attack. What more did he say?
That's right, Emily. Biden made this announcement and spoke directly to the American people, saying that the U.S. stands with Israel. He said that clear message, and he compared Hamas's attack on Israeli civilians to the work of ISIL. He went on to talk about the phone call that he had with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, saying that the two spoke just before he briefed the press, and that Biden had said to Netanyahu that if it had been the U.S. that were attacked, that the U.S. response would be swift, decisive, and overwhelming. He also said that democracies like Israel and U.S. are stronger when they uphold the laws of war. Speaking of not targeting civilians, he went on to call Hamas terrorists who do target civilians, drawing that comparison, and also announced that 14 Americans at least are among those who were killed in Israel. And now we're learning that some 20 U.S. citizens are missing, presumably taken hostage in Gaza. Biden called all of this an act of sheer evil.
We're going to continue to stand united, supporting the people of Israel who are suffering unspeakable losses and opposing the hatred and violence of terrorism. My team has been in near constant communication with our Israeli partners and partners all across the region and the world from the moment this crisis began. We're surging additional military assistance, including ammunition and interceptors, to replenish Iron Dome. We're going to make sure that Israel does not run out of these critical assets to defend its cities and its citizens.
Did the US President, Heidi, talk about Palestinian civilians who are also under constant bombardment in Gaza?
Emily, Biden did say that Hamas does not speak for the Palestinian people, but he did not offer support directly to those who are suffering in Gaza. The State Department also gave a press briefing, and its spokesperson was pressed on this by reporters. And he said that the loss of life in Gaza is unfortunate, but said that the responsibility lies with Hamas for launching its operation and, in a sense, forcing Israel, in the State Department's thinking, to respond in this aggressive manner. Also, Biden did not take any questions responding to the siege now that Gaza is under. Also, the National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan saying that the U.S. is in talks with Israel on the potential of opening a safe passage for civilians in Gaza, though he said this is just under consideration at this point. There's no timeline given. Also, we're learning that the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken will be heading to Israel to meet with Israeli officials on Wednesday.
OK, thanks so much for the update, Heidi Jo Castro in Washington, D.C. Let's stay there now, and joining us is John Kirby, White House National Security Spokesman. He joins us from outside the White House. John Kirby, thanks so much for being on the program. As we've been reporting, strong words from President Biden. He said, and I quote, "We are stronger and more secure when we act according to the rule of law. Terrorists purposely target civilians. We uphold the laws of war." John, what are Washington's obligations under international humanitarian law to protect the lives of civilians?
Well, look, we take seriously all our obligations to humanitarian assistance around the world and to respect for life. We're going to, obviously, nothing's going to change about that when it comes to what we think about when it comes to the humanitarian situation in Gaza and our interest in making sure that humanitarian assistance continues to get to the Palestinian people.
How can you justify the deaths of 260 children who have so far been killed in Gaza and 7 journalists? Hospitals have been bombarded and refugee shelters. Is that the rule of law? Is that Israel defending itself?
Nobody wants to see any more innocent life taken or hurt as a result of the events over the past weekend. And I think it's important to remember that Hamas deliberately struck out at innocent civilians, slaughtering them, and I mean up close and visceral, with knives, torture, rape, gunshots, and that's pretty visceral. Nobody wants to see any more civilian lives lost or hurt, no matter where they live there. And that's why it was important, I think, for the president to talk about setting up the difference, making it clear the difference between Hamas, whose actual goal is to take human life, to take innocent human life, and the Israelis who are doing everything they can to preserve their way of life and to defend themselves. Again, nobody wants to see any more innocent life taken here, but we recognize the violence that have been visited upon the Israeli people, and we got to do what we can to help them secure their population and secure their borders.
But how can you do that when you've got such a densely populated community? You've got 2.3 million people essentially living on top of each other. There were 2,000 strikes in the past 24 hours, dozens, hundreds of people killed. How is that targeting Hamas?
Well, I won't speak to Israeli targeting procedures. I mean, that's a foreign military. They should speak to their operations and their targeting. But you raise a fair point. I mean, it is densely populated. It is heavily urban. And Hamas is deliberately placing innocent Palestinian lives in jeopardy, in danger, by operating in and amongst that urban setting, command and control centers in hospitals and in schools and residential buildings. They're deliberately using the Palestinian people as human shields to defend what they have done. So it's difficult. We understand that. We know the United States military knows how hard it is to target precisely in urban areas. But as for the procedures that will be used, that's really for the Israelis to speak to.
So what would be your message to Palestinians right now in Gaza? Where can they go for safety?
We know that Hamas doesn't represent the majority of you. We know that Hamas is placing you in danger and in greater jeopardy. We know that they're using you as a pawn in their efforts to strike back at Israel and to take the lives of innocent Israeli civilians, women, children, grandmothers.
But John, where can they go?
We know that you're being used in this regard.
If you could please answer my question. Where could they go?
We know that you're being used in this
now?
regard, and we are working and communicating with our allies and partners in the region about routes. But again, I can't speak for Israeli operations or what the Israelis will be doing around that border.
Couldn't you argue, though, that the Palestinians have been living under occupation for decades? Isn't occupation a system of violence?
Again, look, I don't think this is the time or place to get into a geopolitical discussion or debate about the situation there over the last decades. I think we're focused right now, as we rightly ought to be, on making sure Israeli people can be defended, that they can take action against Hamas and the terrorist groups, the terrorists that have visited this violence upon them. That's really what our focus is on.
How can Israel, what's likely to be next, given that we've seen such a strong bombardment, given that we've seen so many strikes? At what cost? When will enough be enough? When will the US step in and say, you know what, there have been enough civilian lives taken on both Israelis, the Israeli side, and in Gaza? When is enough enough?
I'd let the Israelis speak to their military operations. I simply can't predict what they're going to do next, or what operations they're going to plan, or what they're going to, the response that they're going to give. They need to speak to that. They are the ones who were the victims here. More than 1,000 people killed in a brutal, visceral way. So I'll let them speak to their military operations. I can only point back to what the president said today, that we stand with the people of Israel. They have been the victims of this utter brutality and depravity, and we're going to give them the support that they need.
Do you support Israel invading via ground?
Again, I'm not going to get into hypotheticals or speculation about future potential future Israeli operations. I wouldn't even do that for U.S. military operations. I'm certainly not going to speak for the Israeli military. That's a question better put to them.
OK, well, we appreciate your time. Thank you so much. John Kirby, White House National Security Spokesman.
You bet.
Still ahead on Al Jazeera, we'll bring you more coverage of the Gaza-Israel war and all the latest breaking news. Do stay with us.
Hello, the weather's